Okay, so this is using Blazor to manage data in SQL Server and Microsoft Fabric. I'm Michael Washington. Everything that I'm covering, you can find it on my website, blazordata.net. You can also follow me on Blue Sky. I'm adefwebserver.com. No, I'm not on the other place. I've written a bunch of books on Blazor, all available on Amazon.com, and I have a couple of free ones available on syncfusion.com. I have a book I'm working on right now on Blazor and .NET 9. Hopefully it'll be done, it'll be out in January of 2025. I'm currently working on it today. We're first going to cover the agenda, forms over data. What is it? Why this whole thing is about. We're then going to cover a unique control that you may not be aware of called the Blazor Data Sheet. We'll first cover all the code you need to interface it with SQL Server. And then the second half of the presentation, I'm going to cover what it takes to make that Blazor Data Sheet work with Microsoft Fabric. I'll explain what it is if you haven't used Fabric before, and I'll explain the unique challenges toward getting data into Fabric because you have to use a thing called Parquet files and copy into, but I'll go through all the code. First, a quick slide on forms over data. Creating forms is the biggest cost in an application, as you all know. What I like to do with my users is a lot of them are used to using Excel. So I just give them Excel in the application. All the data is just right there. They can just update it. It looks like Excel, acts like Excel, and I just basically give them a save button and it saves to the database. So that's kind of what I'm going to show you today. Additionally, I'm not going to have time to go over it, but the control I'm going to show you does support full validation because obviously without validation, it would be kind of worthless. So the Blazor Data Sheet control, I'll first show you it with SQL Server, and let's just go ahead into a demo. And basically, this control, it's in GitHub. It's actually not created by me. It's actually created by another person, and it's all free. It's all in GitHub. You have all the full source. Now, this person, he's really concerned about making a control that works like Excel. So as you can see, you have summing. He even has things like drop downs, full formatting. One thing's really nice is he has a redo undo button. So that's really, really nice. But basically his concern is to make a control that does like Excel. He wasn't concerned about data. So my contribution is I did a fork to his project. And when you pull down my fork, again, the download is available on blazordata.net. When you pull down my fork, you'll see an option for data editor. When you go there, it'll first detect that you don't have a database connection, so it allows you to put a connection in. You set the database connection, and then I'll just show you all the tables. Here I am going to, oh yeah, your standard sample Microsoft database, and of course showing a table here. You just double click and go into the fields, and you can make changes. Here, if it's a date field, there's a date picker, and you just click save. Again, you have the redo undo. If you want to insert something, you can insert, delete columns. And also, of course, if I turn on the validators, it'll, of course, do validation. So it's a basic control. It does what it says on the tin. Okay. So let's look at the application. Again, like I said, it's basically the core control is available on GitHub. If you pull down my fork, you'll see the data editor. And this, of course, is what I showed you, how I first show you the tables. You select the table. You can update values. Obviously, you cannot save if I did not detect that you have a primary key. Obviously, inserting, you just click on insert. You do updates, hit save. If there's any errors, obviously, I'll show you the errors. And obviously, deleting, just select on a row, click delete. Again, it does do validation. You can do any sort of custom validation. You write it in C# code. So any sort of complex validation, you can do it. Obviously, I won't have time to go into it, but you can do it. In this case, if I did have validation, when someone puts in a value that's wrong, it'll show it in red. You do have soft validation and hard validation so that In some cases, you will still allow them to save it, even though you've highlighted in red, or you can actually highlight it in a different color because, again, you can customize the entire thing. Let's take a look at the code. Now, this right here looks like a lot, but it actually isn't, because up here, it's just basically initializing, this is written in Blazor. This is all on one single page, on one single Razor page. So this pretty much just sets up the page. It has a dialog box for that connection. This right here is just for setting that database connection. When you set the database connection, I call this method to get the tables in the database so I can show it in a dropdown. When you select a table, these two methods are called to basically interrogate the table to determine what the fields are. So these utility fields down here, where I determine what are the primary keys, what are computed columns, because you can't update a computed column, what are the identity columns, because I need those for doing the update statements, and a couple of other utility methods to determine column types. At that point, I then display the data in the data sheet, and when you click the Save button, it calls this method to save data. I then call this process changes, because what this does is when you first load the data, I put it into a data table. When you make changes, I then have another data table. I compare the two data tables to determine what fields have been updated or changed, what fields are, what rows are new, and that's how I determine the inserted rows, and then what rows have been deleted, and then I have the deleted rows. I then send the command to SQL Server to do the updates, and that's pretty much it. So again, I've already written the code, so you don't have to. However, obviously, to integrate this into your own projects, this pretty much shows you the layout. When you do pull down the project, you are going to see an additional thing called a custom render. And this is really powerful because in this case, I wanted, if you have a time field, I have a special time picker that shows up. So you can see in my code how I was able to do that. But what it shows you is that inside the data grid, inside each cell, you can control exactly what the experience is for people to see data, and when they update the data, you can have special pickers and that sort of thing. So even though it's all in an Excel sheet, you actually have quite a bit of customization. Let's just quickly go through the code again. So I have that toolbar at the top, and this is pretty much showing you that code. Basically, I have the buttons, and this is a save button. It just on click, it calls my save method. You have some other, redo undos. You've got that table dropdown. So pretty much basic code. Let's look at the grid itself. So then when I display data in the grid, let's look at the code that you need for that. All it is this. So he does have a NuGet package. So you put the NuGet package in so that you have the data sheet there, and then you just put the data on the sheet, and boom, all that other functionality, the redo, undos, all that stuff, boom, it's all there. This is all the code you need. When I'm loading data, there's a bunch of steps. Again, I've done the work for you, so you don't have to, but just quickly go through just some of the highlights here. And that is that when the data is loaded, I have a data table, which I save as original data table. I have this ID column so that I can use it when comparing the two data tables. When I'm loading the data into the data sheet, there's a couple of classes I have to determine various things and when cells are changed. When you hit the save button, this is that process changes method, whereas first I process the updated rows, then I process the inserted rows, and then I process the deleted rows. So for the updated rows, it actually turned out to be a little bit more complicated than I was expecting. Again, like I said, I did the work, so you don't have to. But for example, I have to determine, based upon the primary key, how to do the update statement. Again, everything is parameterized. Again, more of the steps I do. Adding data, same thing. I have to determine, what's been added. I have to determine when inserting the data, with the primary keys and that sort of thing. And then, of course, deleting data. There's some special things to consider. But like I said, in my testing, it works with pretty much every table that I've run into. And again, the code's on GitHub. So if you do find any issues, just go ahead and raise it on GitHub. So now I want to spend the rest of the remaining time talking about Fabric, because Fabric, if you're not familiar with it, it's actually it's not just a data warehouse, but it actually has Power BI into it, data factory, has notebooks, the whole 9 yards. Right now, I just want to talk specifically about data warehouses. First, though, let's talk about how do you connect to Fabric. And let's talk about how to connect to Fabric using SQL Server Management Studio. So what you do is you go into your Azure portal and you go to Microsoft Intra ID and you go to app registrations, you go new registration, and you create an application, you give it a name. In this case, we're going to call it Fabric Data User. Now, what we're creating is actually referred to as a service principal. So when you're creating an Azure application, an Intra application, but it's being used like a person, it's called a service principal. So we're going to call our service principal Fabric Data User, and we're going to use this service principal to connect to our Fabric Data Warehouse. When we do the connection, you have to have the username, and the username is going to be the application client ID. So if I go to Overview, I can go ahead and get that. So I'm going to copy that down. I'm going to need it later. I'm also going to need a password. So the way I get the password is I go to Certificates and Secrets, I click New Client Secret, and I create a secret. That's going to be my password. Then at that point, I go into Fabric, I go into the admin portal, I go to tenant settings, and under service principals can use Fabric APIs, I enable that because it's disabled by default. Now, if I go into a workspace in Fabric, I go to Manage Access, I go to Add People or Groups, and I add that service principal. In this case, you actually use the name, not the client ID. A little confusing, but so you add the name, you have to make sure you give it admin rights. At this point, it has programmatic access to everything that's inside that workspace. However, in this case, all we're concerned about is the data warehouse. So I'm going to go into the data warehouse. I'm going to click the gear icon, and then the name will have the name of the data warehouse, and then I have the SQL connection string. Now I have everything I need to connect using the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So I'll go into there, I'll select Database Engine, and at this point, I have my server name. The key thing is under authentication, you have to select Microsoft Intra Service Principal. That username is that client ID, the password is that secret, and then I just go ahead and click Connect. At this point, all the tables in the data warehouse show up just like normal SQL Server. I can do SQL commands to do selects. I can even do updates. The thing you're going to find at this point, though, is putting data in. You could do inserts, but they're going to be really slow. And that's because the data warehouse really is not SQL Server. It's really a bunch of Parquet files stored in Azure Storage, and that's why it's so cost effective. So how do you get data into your Fabric warehouse? The way I do it is I use Microsoft Blazor. So how do I connect using Microsoft Blazor? I have another project called Fabric Data Explorer. Again, the link, it's in GitHub. The link is available on my site, blazordata.net. And what this does is these are the NuGet packages I'm using. And this is the class for connecting. And this is the class for creating the connection string. The key thing there in highlighted is that the authentication has to be set to Active Directory Service Principal. Otherwise, the user ID is a client ID. The password is the secret. The catalog name is, of course, the warehouse name. And boom, you just connect. Here's just showing how I connect, and I'm able to show the tables in the warehouse just using a command like that. Okay, so how I am able to get data into the Fabric warehouse quickly is using this program is I have this import data tab, and this is how you import it. However, I just want to have a quick slide to show you how people normally get data into Fabric, and that is they usually use pipelines. And the reason why I don't use pipelines is because, number one, when you have a problem with the pipeline, it's hard to debug. It's actually not as fast as the method I'm going to show you. The method I'm going to show you can import about 4 million rows a minute. And also the other thing with pipelines is they're a little bit difficult to understand. Whereas right now I'm going to go through all the C# code to import data. So obviously I think it's easier. The method is the 3-step method. First, you create a Parquet file. And Parquet is actually the native format of Fabric. You then put that Parquet file in Azure Storage. And the reason why you're doing that is the third step is you use the SQL Server command copy into to import the data from the Parquet file into your Fabric warehouse. And like I said, in my experience, it can move about 4 million rows a minute. So again, it's kind of more of the details there. And let's quickly look at the application. So when you go to import data, you first set a database connection to a SQL Server database. I've already covered that. You connect to a Fabric warehouse. Again, I covered that. You then connect to a Fabric storage because, again, we need to put the Parquet file there. You select a table from your SQL Server. You hit import data. It processes it, and boom, it's in there. If you look inside your warehouse, it's there. If you look through the SQL Server Management Studio, it's there also. Let's quickly look at the code. When you click the Import Data button, obviously, I show you the drop-downs and you select a table. Then when you select a table, I just have a select statement to just grab the data. I do row number over because I do set an ID column so that when I import the data, I have this ID column that's just auto-numbered. You don't need that, but I like to do that. Then I call my import into Fabric class. And here's the code. It's not that much. The first thing I do is I have a method that takes a SQL query and determines what the database fields are. Then I create a Parquet schema. And again, there's a free NuGet package, parquet.net. So I'm calling that where I'm saying these are the fields. Then I have a Parquet table where I pass that Parquet schema in there. Then I read through all my rows, adding them to the Parquet table one by one. The next step is, this is all in memory. So I take a memory stream and I push that Parquet file into Azure Storage. Now, obviously, I don't want to put it into a public Azure Storage. So I use this code to create a SAS token. I set it to 1 hour, but I only need actually just a couple of minutes. And then I call that copy into statement where I specify the Parquet file, the shared access signature, passing the SAS token. Up here, I'm creating the table if it's not already there, or deleting data if I'm replacing all the data. But again, this is just a SQL command. And here I execute the script, and it's done. And like I said, it can move about 4 million rows a minute. Finally, with the time remaining, I'll just cover with Fabric Warehouse, you're usually not updating data the way you would, say, with SQL Server. However, sometimes you do need to. So therefore, I actually did write all the code needed to actually allow you to use that data sheet control to actually update the data in Fabric. However, I couldn't do the same way I did with SQL Server because, like I said, if you're trying to do inserting data, you can't just issue SQL commands the way I've been doing it with the earlier example. So the application, and again, if you go to the data sheet there, you set a Fabric connection, you set an Azure storage connection because it needs that for moving the Parquet files, and it just works like normal. You can select a table, you can see the data, you can make changes, you hit save, and it saves. Obviously, it shows up in the warehouse, as well as if you look through SQL Server Enterprise Manager. However, and these are my last 2 slides, the difference was, was that when you hit the save button, first, it deletes any rows that have been removed, but it also deletes any rows that have been updated. And the reason why is the next step is it creates a Parquet file where any new rows, that part's obvious, but any updated rows. Then it puts that Parquet file in Azure Storage, like I showed before, and then uses a copy into to import it into Fabric. So when they hit the save button, it takes about 15 to 30 seconds for the save to actually happen. However, this data grid control, this is just a little more details of what I just talked about. However, that data grid control uses virtualization, and I've been able to show hundreds of thousands of rows of data at one time. Boom, on the screen. A person can make a change to this row, this row, this row. They hit save, and still 15 to 30 seconds, everything's saved. Everything I talked about here is available on my site, blazordata.net. I got this QR code. Go ahead and give me an evaluation if you would like. And otherwise, get .NET 9. And that's all I got.
Michael, that was awesome. That was awesome. I learned so much, and you are making me question some of my life choices. Like, yeah, maybe I should stop using, well, I mean, SQL Server Management Studio is awesome, but what you're showing is so much easier as a user. And do you actually use data warehouses in any real-world projects?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, I've got this one project where we have to move 300 million rows of data from the mainframe into the warehouse so that they can do the reporting through PowerBI.
Wow.
This is replacing an existing Crystal Reports thing, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, and of course, I'm using Blazor. All the users using Blazor. They're using, again, the data sheet control, because we do a thing where, you got a bronze, silver, gold, a status where they can, make changes and move the changes. Everything works great. It's extremely cost effective. And I'm really excited about this technology.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, that's the reality of enterprise workflows, right? You need those complex things and just a ton of data moving back and forth.
Yep.
Yeah, well done, well done. Now, you are obviously a big Blazor fan,
Yes.
like I am. So let me put you in the spot here
Sure.
for a second. .NET 9 is out.
Yes.
We heard Dan Roth and Steve Sanderson and the entire Blazor team
Yes.
talk about what's new. What excites you the most?
It's funny. One of the things that excites me the most is when a person is using your Blazor app and they move to another tab, or, let's say they're on their phone and they lose connectivity, the experience of losing that Signal R connection was not, it's kind of bad, and it goes, it's like, oh, you're done. You have to hit refresh. In Blazor 9, it's so smooth. This nice box comes up. It's very attractive. It automatically tries to reconnect. So in most cases, the box just pops up and goes away, and the person, they're really good. So I just like the whole, if the person gets disconnected from Signal R, .NET 9, it's the reason why I'm going to upgrade all my projects to .NET 9. And that's a lot of projects.
Yeah, well said. So the new, reconnection UX is really nice for users,
Really
and
nice.
I also love like the, choice that we have as developers between interactive modes and static
Yes.
modes. What is interactive, what is not, and then mixing and matching it all to suit your app needs. So a lot of ammunition for us developers to go make amazing apps. Yeah.
Yes.
So, Michael, thank you so very much. That was amazing. And you already had a slide up for .NET 9. I'm going to try to bring that up again. So here it is, folks. Go get .NET 9, and that's how you're going to see all the goodies with Blazor and everything else light up for you. So, Michael, thank you so much for your time and doing amazing things for the Blazor ecosystem. We love you. Keep doing what you're doing.